Before you close your eyes tonight, I want to take you on a journey, not to the endless sand dunes you might picture when you think of the Sahara, but to a world that will surprise you. A Sahara where the air was soft with the scent of grass after rain, where rivers glittered under a warm sun, and where herds of antelope moved quietly across open meadows. This is not a fantasy. This was real, and it was not so very long ago. Tonight, we begin a story that stretches across thousands of years. It is the story of how one of the harshest places on Earth was once a green paradise, and how, little by little, it became the great desert we know today. Imagine lying under a tree that casts a cool shadow, hearing the distant sound of water flowing in a wide river. Birds call to each other from the branches above you. Somewhere nearby, a group of people is setting fishing nets in the shallows, while others tend small plots of grain. This was the Sahara of the past. The desert you see on a map today is vast, almost the size of the United States. A sea of sand stretching from the Atlantic in the west to the Red Sea in the east. Temperatures can soar to over 50 degrees Celsius in the hottest months, and rainfall in some areas is less than a few centimeters a year. But this is only one chapter in its life. The Sahara, like the Earth itself, has seasons that last not months, but millennia. Long ago, the rhythm of our planet's movement through space shifted in a way that brought life-giving rain to North Africa. The landscape responded. Grasslands replaced dunes, rivers carved paths through valleys. Shallow lakes formed where the land dipped. Animals, large and small, came to drink from these waters. People followed the animals, and in time they built communities here. When you picture the Sahara today, it may seem eternal, as though it has always been a place of sand and wind. But as we move through this story, you'll see that deserts, too, have their own cycles of birth, transformation, and rebirth. Climate, like the tide, changes over time, and the Sahara's green age is a reminder that the Earth's surface is alive, always moving between different phases. As we travel together through these chapters, we will explore not only the physical changes, the way rivers formed and grasslands spread, but also the human lives that once flourished here. People fished in its rivers, painted animals on its rock walls, and left behind tools buried in what is now dry sand. They lived with the land, and the land shaped their stories. For now, I invite you to imagine this green Sahara as the day begins. The morning sun rises over a wide plain, touching the tops of acacia trees with gold. A herd of gazelles grazes near a slow-moving river. Somewhere beyond them, a group of hunters returns with fish caught in woven traps. The air is warm but not dry, carrying the scent of wet earth. There is no sound of wind-driven sand, only the rustle of grass in a gentle breeze. This is where our journey begins. A world familiar, yet hidden beneath the desert sands. Over the next chapters, we will learn how it came to be, why it changed, and what secrets it still holds beneath its golden surface. For now, let this image rest in your mind, as steady and peaceful as the water that once flowed where dunes now rise. If you could step into the Sahara of 10,000 years ago, you would not recognize it. The horizon would not be broken by waves of sand, but by the dark green line of distant trees. Rivers would cut silver paths across the land, their surfaces dotted with waterbirds. Lakes, some as large as modern countries, would mirror the sky. Grasslands would roll in every direction, shifting from deep emerald to pale gold as the seasons passed. This was the green Sahara, a time when the desert bloomed. It was not an accident, and it was not magic. It was the result of a delicate balance between Earth's position in space and the energy it received from the sun. At certain points in the planet's slow cycles, the tilt of Earth's axis changes, just enough to pull monsoon rains farther north for thousands of years. This pattern brought regular, life-sustaining water to what is now one of the driest places on the planet. Life responded to the gift of water. In the shade of acacia trees, elephants wandered in small herds, pulling branches with their trunks. Hippos wallowed in muddy riverbanks, flicking their ears against the insects. Crocodiles lay half-hidden in the shallows, watching for fish. Herds of gazelles and antelope grazed on the open plains, followed by lions who hunted in the tall grass. Even the skies were busy, filled with migrating birds resting on their way between continents. And among all this life, there were people. They were not strangers passing through. They built their homes here. Villages rose near riverbanks and lake shores, where fish were plentiful and the soil was rich. People wove baskets to hold grain, shaped pottery to store water, and carved tools from stone. They painted the walls of rocky shelters with images of the animals they knew: giraffes bending to drink, cattle with curved horns, fish swimming in clear water. These images remain today, silent witnesses to a world that has vanished. In this era, the Sahara was not an obstacle between cultures. It was a bridge. People could travel, trade, and share ideas across a land that offered food, water, and shelter. The paths they walked became the early threads of connection that would one day weave civilizations together. When you imagine the Green Sahara, think of it not as a single place, but as a vast, living tapestry. Each part, the rivers, the grasslands, the forests, was connected. The rains filled the rivers fed the lakes, and the lakes gave life to animals and people. Everything depended on the water, and the water depended on the sky. It was a balance so fine that even a small change could set it on a new path. And that change was coming. For now, though, picture the scene at midday. Children playing at the water's edge, their laughter echoing over the ripples, the distant calls of birds circling above, the quiet sound of grass moving under the wind. The sun is warm, but not harsh. The air smells of green life. It is hard to imagine it could ever be different, yet the earth was already turning toward a future where this green world would fade into sand. The secret behind the Green Sahara lies not in the soil or the rivers, but far above, in the slow and steady movement of the Earth itself. Our planet does not sit perfectly still in space. It spins on a tilted axis, and that tilt changes slightly over time. The path it follows around the sun shifts as well, tracing patterns so vast that one cycle can take more than 20,000 years to complete. This slow shifting, called precession, is like the gentle wobble of a spinning top. When the tilt and orbit line up just right, the sun's warmth in the northern hemisphere becomes more intense during summer months. This extra heat pulls the tropical monsoon northward, reaching deep into the heart of the Sahara. And when the rains come, life follows. It is a quiet kind of magic, not the sudden flash of transformation, but a slow, steady invitation for the land to change. With each season of rain, seeds sprout, roots spread, and grasslands grow taller. Rivers swell and carve deeper paths. Lakes fill, their surfaces shimmering under a bright sky. The air calls with the presence of water, drawing animals and people closer for thousands of years. This rhythm held steady. The people who lived in the Green Sahara may not have known about the tilt of the earth or the pull of the sun, but they understood the rains. They knew the signs, the way the wind shifted, The clouds that gathered on the horizon, the scent of moisture before the first drops fell. They marked the seasons not just by the stars above them, but by the greening of the land under their feet. The balance was delicate. A small change in the tilt or orbit would shift the monsoon rains away, leaving the Sahara to dry once more. And that is exactly what would happen in time. The gentle wobble of the earth would turn the rain southward, and the land would begin its long journey back to desert. But in this moment of our story, the rains still come. Imagine standing on a hillside, watching the clouds drift in from the south, heavy with water. The first drops fall, darkening the dust. Soon, the sound of rain fills the air, a soft, steady rhythm that will bring another season of life to the land. You close your eyes and breathe in the scent of wet earth, knowing that for now, the balance holds. There is a name that scientists use for the Sahara's green age. They call it the African humid period. It began more than 10,000 years ago, when the northward pull of the monsoon rains reached its peak. Year after year, the desert bloomed under skies heavy with clouds. The change was not sudden. It was the patient work of centuries. Yet compared to the long, dry ages before it, this was a transformation as dramatic as a desert flower opening. The rain. The African humid period was not just wetter. It was alive in every sense. Rain fell in generous patterns, not just in a few storms, but in long, nourishing seasons. Grasslands stretched from the Atlantic to the Nile, broken by forests and lakes. Rivers ran deep and wide, carrying fish that swam upstream to feed and spawn. In the lowlands, lakes formed, some so large they rivaled the inland seas of today. One of the greatest of these was Lake Megachad, a vast body of water that may have been larger than all of today's Great Lakes combined. It covered an area that now spans several countries, shimmering under the sun, surrounded by reeds and alive with bird calls. Crocodiles hunted in its shallows, and hippos grazed along its shores. People settled wherever water and fertile soil met. They planted early crops, herded cattle, and fished in rivers that never ran dry. The tools they made, stone blades, grinding stones, and pottery, was shaped not for survival in a harsh desert, but for life in a land of plenty. They left behind rock art that still survives in hidden valleys, scenes of daily life, herds of animals, and rivers filled with fish. These images tell us not just that the land was green, but that it was home. This period was also a time of connection. The Sahara was not a barrier, but a pathway, linking communities from west to east. Ideas, tools, and stories traveled along these routes, carried by people who could move freely across the grasslands. The land itself encouraged connection. The rivers guided journeys, and the lakes offered safe havens along the way. It is easy to imagine a day in this time. The sky is bright, but softened by clouds. The grass moves in long waves under the wind, and the river sings quietly as it winds through the valley. In the distance, a group of people gathers near the water to pull in their fishing nets. Children chase each other through the grass, their feet wet from the riverbank. The world feels stable, generous, and endless, and yet, even in this time of abundance, the Earth's cycles were still turning. Far above, the planet's orbit was shifting again, slowly changing the pattern of the rains. No one could feel it yet, but the first steps toward the desert's return had already begun. In the heart of the green Sahara, life unfolded at a pace shaped by the seasons and the steady return of the rains. The people who lived here were not merely passing through, they were rooted to the land in ways that modern eyes might find difficult to imagine. They knew its patterns, when the rivers swelled with fish, when the grass would be richest for grazing, when the skies would bring storms, and when the air would turn dry for a while. Daily life was a blend of work, community, and quiet moments. Under open skies, in the early morning, when the air was cool and the light was soft, families would walk to the water's edge. Some would cast nets woven from plant fibers, watching the slow movement of fish beneath the surface. Others would tend to small herds of cattle, guiding them to graze in the freshest pastures. Crops grew in plots near the rivers, watered not by irrigation systems, but by the generosity of nature itself. Millet, sorghum, and other early grains gave food security to communities that had once depended solely on hunting and gathering. The midday hours were often for rest. In the shade of acacia trees, elders would share stories, tales of the great animals, of spirits that lived in the water, and of ancestors who had walked the same land. These stories, passed from mouth to ear, carried not only entertainment, but lessons for survival: how to read the sky for rain, how to track an animal, how to find water in the dry weeks. Art was woven into life in ways both practical and ceremonial. Pottery was decorated with flowing lines and shapes inspired by the movement of water and animals. Rock walls in sheltered valleys became canvases for paintings: herds of antelope, hunters in motion, cattle with long curved horns, and fish, so detailed you can almost see their scales. These were not simply decorations. They were records, reminders of the world as it was. Children learned by watching and joining in. They would follow their parents to the rivers, learning to weave baskets, shape clay, or prepare grain. They grew up with a deep familiarity with the land, knowing which plants could heal wounds, which trees gave shade, and which paths would lead safely to the next settlement. The soundscape of the green Sahara was as rich as its colors. You might hear the low calls of cattle, the chattering of birds along the river, the soft slap of a fish jumping, and the distant laughter of children playing. At night, the sky was a dome of stars, unbroken by artificial light, and the cool air carried the scents of grass and damp earth. In this way, the people and the land existed in a mutual rhythm. The Sahara provided food, water, and shelter, and in return the people moved with its seasons, never taking more than it could give. It was a balance as delicate as the climate that sustained it, and, like the climate, it would not last forever. In the time of the Green Sahara, the land belonged not only to people, but to giants. Across the open plains and beside the winding rivers, creatures of extraordinary size and power moved through the grass. Their presence shaped the rhythm of the land as much as the rains themselves. Elephants roamed in family herds, their deep footprints pressing into the damp soil. Near lakes and riverbanks, they traveled great distances in search of fresh grazing grounds, stripping leaves from acacia trees with their trunks, and bathing in shallow water to cool their vast bodies. In the evenings, their low rumbles could be heard for miles, a reminder to every living creature that the giants were near. Hippos lived in the deeper bends of rivers and along the shores of wide lakes. During the day, they rested in the cool water, their ears and nostrils just breaking the surface. At night, they emerged to graze, their heavy shapes moving silently through the tall grass. Their trails, worn into the earth over generations, became familiar pathways for other animals as well. Crocodiles were the silent watchers of the waterways. They could remain still for hours, their eyes and nostrils just above the surface, until a fish or bird came too close. These ancient predators had shared the waters with humans for as long as anyone could remember, inspiring both respect and caution. Giraffes moved gracefully across the plains, their long necks swaying as they reached for tender leaves high in the trees. Their slow, deliberate steps left barely a sound in the grass, yet their towering shapes could be seen from far away. Herds of antelope and gazelles grazed nearby, ever watchful for the lions that hunted in the shadows. The lions of the green Sahara were strong and proud, their coats blending into the golden grasses. They hunted in groups, using the cover of night or the edge of tall grass to approach their prey. Their roars carried far across the open land, a sound that could freeze both animals and humans in place. Birds, too, added to the richness of the land. Flamingos gathered in bright flocks along lake shores, their pink feathers glowing in the morning light. Storks and herons waded in the shallows, while eagles circled high above, their sharp eyes scanning for movement below. This diversity was possible only because the land offered what all life needs: water, shelter, and food. The rivers and lakes were the heart of it all, connecting every creature in an unbroken chain of dependence. To walk through the green Sahara was to share the land with these giants, to know their patterns and respect their power. People learned to live alongside them, sometimes hunting, sometimes avoiding, always aware that this was a world they shared. In the chapters to come, we will see how this balance began to shift as the rains grew less certain and the giants faced a new challenge, a changing world. But for now, imagine the sun setting over a wide grass plain, the silhouettes of giraffes against the orange sky, and the deep rumble of elephants drifting through the warm evening air. Every great chapter in Earth's history eventually turns a page. For the green Sahara, that turning began so quietly that few, if any, could have recognized it for what it was. It started not with a sudden drought, but with subtle changes in the rhythm of the seasons. The rains still came, but they seemed to pause longer between storms. Rivers that once ran full throughout the year began to shrink during the dry months. Lakes pulled back from their shores, leaving pale outlines in the mud where the water had been. High above, the cause was set in motion. The slow wobble of Earth's axis, the same celestial dance that had drawn the monsoons north, was shifting. Again, the planet's position in its orbit meant the sun's warmth was changing, little by little, year after year. This shift pushed the rain southward, away from the heart of the Sahara, returning them to the equatorial zones. The people living on the land may have noticed first in the timing of the grass. It no longer grew as tall in certain valleys. Some pastures turned yellow earlier in the season, forcing herders to move their cattle sooner than they once did. Fishing required more patience as river levels fell and the water warmed. Animals, too, felt the change. Elephants wandered farther in search of fresh grazing grounds. Herds of antelope grew smaller, following the shrinking bands of green. The hippos that once filled the riverbanks now found fewer deep pools to rest in during the day. But these were not yet disasters. Life adapted, as it always had. The people shifted their settlements closer to the remaining lakes and larger rivers. They learned to store water in clay jars and to harvest crops earlier. To an outside observer, it might have seemed like nothing more than a dry spell. But in truth, the balance was beginning to tilt. The African humid period had lasted 4,000 of years, yet its foundation was fragile, dependent on the position of the planet, the path of the monsoons, and the warmth of the seasons. Now, that foundation was slowly crumbling, and with each passing century, the signs grew clearer. In the distance, dunes began to stir again. At first, They were small ridges of sand along the edges of dry riverbeds. The wind gathered them grain by grain, building them higher. Vegetation thinned in some places, exposing bare earth to the wind. The desert was waking, stretching its boundaries, reclaiming the space it had once dominated. Yet for those living in the green Sahara, the memory of abundance was still strong. Few could imagine that this slow shift would one day erase the grasslands entirely, leaving behind a sea of sand. Asterisk as the rains grew weaker and the rivers shrank, the people of the green Sahara faced decisions that would shape the course of human history. For centuries, they had lived in harmony with the land, following its seasons and trusting in its generosity. But now the land was asking for more movement, more adaptation, more resilience than it had before. The changes did not come all at once. At first, communities simply shifted closer to water. Villages that had once stood on open grasslands moved toward the banks of shrinking rivers or the edges of lakes that still held life. Herds of cattle were driven farther in search of green pastures, and fishing trips grew longer as familiar streams dried. But as the years passed, some lakes disappeared entirely, leaving behind empty basins that cracked under the sun. Rivers that had been wide and deep became seasonal, flowing only during the brief rains. In the driest places, the wind carried sand into once fertile fields, covering them in pale drifts. The struggle for resources began to change the relationships between neighboring groups. Where there had once been open exchange and travel across the grasslands, now there was competition for the few remaining fertile lands. Some groups merged for survival, pooling their skills and resources. Others broke apart, with smaller bands moving in different directions to find food and water. Slowly, migrations began. Families left behind the heart of the Sahara and moved toward the more dependable waters of the Nile Valley, the Sahel, or the coasts of the Mediterranean. These migrations were not just movements of people, they were movements of knowledge, traditions, and stories. The skills honed in the green Sahara, from herding to pottery to fishing, traveled with them, shaping the cultures that would grow in their new homes. Historians believe that this great migration played a role in the rise of civilizations along the Nile. People who had once fished in Sahara lakes now built boats for the river. Farmers who had once tended crops in seasonal floodplains learned to work with the predictable rise and fall of the Nile's waters. The green Sahara's loss became the Nile Valley's gain. Yet for those who stayed behind, life became increasingly difficult. The giants of the land, elephants, lions, giraffes, moved on with the grasslands, leaving the remaining people in a quieter, emptier world. The rock art on the walls became records of what once was, even as the scenes they depicted grew rarer in everyday life. And still, the desert advanced. Dunes rose where villages once stood. The wind whispered across empty plains, carrying the scent of dust instead of rain. The Sahara was reclaiming its ancient form, and the people who had lived through its green age could only watch as the paradise faded. Asterisk, there comes a moment in every transformation when the change is no longer subtle, when the signs are unmistakable, and the new reality can no longer be denied. For the Sahara, this moment came when the grasslands were gone, the rivers no longer reached the sea, and the wind carried only the scent of dust. The desert had been born again. It was not the first time the Sahara had worn this face, nor would it be the last. Over millions of years, it had shifted between wet and dry, between green and gold. But for the people who lived through this change, it must have felt final, the closing of a door that had once opened onto a paradise The dunes rose higher with each season. The wind sculpted them into endless waves, cresting in sharp ridges that shimmered in the sunlight. Where lakes had been, there were now wide, flat plains of white salt. The earth cracked in deep patterns, and the few plants that remained clung low to the ground, their roots searching desperately for water far below. The animals that had defined the green Sahara were gone. Elephants and giraffes had moved south toward more dependable rains. Lions no longer prowled the grasslands, because there were no grasslands to hunt in. The birds that once filled the skies migrated elsewhere, following the water. Only the hardiest creatures remained, small lizards, insects, and birds that could survive on little more than the morning dew. For the humans who stayed, survival meant constant movement. Waterholes became the lifeline of existence, and their locations were guarded knowledge. Some people dug shallow wells where the sand was damp, pulling up water that tasted faintly of salt. Others traveled with the seasons, following the rains, always ready to move when the land grew to dry. But even as the desert took hold, memories of the Green Age persisted. Stories were told of great rivers where now there was only sand. Children heard of the hippos and crocodiles that had once filled the lakes, and of the vast herds that moved like storms across the grasslands. These stories, told in the flicker of firelight, must have felt like tales from another world. The Sahara's rebirth as a desert was a slow, inevitable process, yet it reshaped the map of human life in North Africa. Villages disappeared, trade routes shifted, and entire cultures either adapted or vanished. The land that had once connected people now divided them, becoming one of the most formidable barriers on Earth. And yet, hidden beneath the new desert's golden surface, the past remained, locked in layers of soil and stone, waiting for the day when someone would uncover the traces of rivers, the outlines of lake shores, and the tools of those who had called the Green Sahara home. When a landscape changes so completely, it can seem as if the past has been erased. Yet the people who lived through the Sahara's transformation carried its memory forward, not only in their hearts, but in the traditions, art, and stories they passed down. These cultural traces are like faint echoes. They tell us that the Green Age was not forgotten, even as the desert grew around them. In rock shelters, far from the nearest permanent water, ancient paintings and carvings remain. They show animals that could not survive here today: giraffes bending to drink from rivers, herds of cattle grazing on open grasslands, hippos wading in lakes. These images were not just decorations, they were records, a visual memory of a world that had existed within living memory. Some of the scenes even show people swimming, a detail that feels almost impossible when you stand in the same spot today and see only dry sand. Oral traditions also preserve the Green Sahara's legacy. Stories told by elders spoke of a time when water was plentiful, when rivers crossed the land, and when great animals roamed freely. Some tales may have been passed down for hundreds of generations, gradually blending history with legend. In these stories, the rivers might have been given spirits, the rains might have been the gift of sky gods, and the animals might have been seen as guardians of the land. These memories were not confined to the desert. As people migrated toward the Nile, the Sahel, and the Mediterranean, they brought fragments of the Sahara's green past with them, some farming techniques, some words, and even some patterns in pottery design may trace their origins back to the humid age. The memory of that fertile time can have influenced how early Nile civilizations valued the seasonal flooding of the river, seeing in it a reminder of the abundance their ancestors once knew. Even today, the evidence of the Green Sahara lies hidden. Beneath the dunes, ancient riverbeds, visible only from satellites, stretch for hundreds of kilometers. Buried sediments hold the pollen of plants that no longer grow in the desert. Fossilized bones tell of fish, elephants, and other creatures that once thrived here. Scientists studying these remains are piecing together a story that the desert itself has long concealed. The cultural memory of the Green Sahara is not only a reminder of what was lost, but also a testament to the resilience of the people who lived through its transformation. Though the land changed, they carried their knowledge forward, adapting to new environments while honoring the world they had left behind. In the next part, we will rise above the desert, not in imagination alone, but through the eyes of satellites, to see the hidden scars and secrets of this ancient green world. The Sahara can seem endless, a rolling sea of sand and stone stretching far beyond the horizon. But from high above, through the eyes of satellites, another picture emerges. The desert's surface is not as empty as it appears. It is marked with faint lines, soft curves, and shadowed shapes, the ghostly remains of rivers, lakes, and floodplains that once sustained the Green Sahara. These ancient waterways are invisible to the eye when you stand among the dunes. Wind has covered them, rain has forgotten them, and time has worn them smooth. But satellite images, using light beyond the visible spectrum, can reveal what lies hidden. Wide channels that once carried water from mountains to lakes now appear as pale veins across the desert floor. Some of these riverbeds are hundreds of kilometers long, their paths winding exactly as living rivers do. There are also great basins, shallow depressions that once held vast lakes. Lake Megachad, which in its prime covered an area larger than modern-day Germany, still leaves its outline behind. Even now, in its reduced form, Lake Chad holds only a fraction of the water it once did. In the satellite view, the full size of the ancient shoreline is unmistakable, curving like a giant crescent in the sand. Scientists use these images like maps to trace the Sahara's green history. They match the dry riverbeds with sediments that show traces of freshwater life, shells from tiny snails, pollen from grasses and trees, and even the remains of fish. In some places, the sands hide fossils of hippos and crocodiles, creatures that could never survive in today's climate. The view from space also reveals how connected the Sahara once was. Some river systems appear to have flowed all the way to the Nile, joining the Great River in feeding a network of life that stretched across much of North Africa. Others may have emptied into the Mediterranean, carrying nutrients and life far beyond the desert's borders. From this height, it becomes clear that the Sahara's dryness is not permanent. It is only one phase in a repeating cycle. The scars of its green past run deep, waiting for the planet's tilt and orbit to shift again, to call the rains north once more. Whether that will happen in thousands of years or tens of thousands, no one can say. But the patterns written on the earth suggest that deserts, too, can bloom again. For now, the Sahara from space is a reminder that beneath the gold and silence lies a memory of water, and that landscapes, like people, carry their histories within them. For thousands of years after the Sahara turned to desert, its green age lived only in whispers, in the rock art hidden in valleys, in the stories of rivers that no longer flowed. To most, it seemed like legend, an imagined paradise buried under sand. But in the past century, scientists began to piece together the truth, uncovering evidence that the Sahara was once as alive as any rainforest or savanna. The first clues came from explorers who traveled deep into the desert in the 19th and early 20th centuries. They found rock paintings of giraffes, elephants, hippos, and fish, animals that could never survive in the modern Sahara. At first, these discoveries puzzled them. How could such creatures have lived here unless the land had once been entirely different? In the decades that followed, archaeologists began to study these artworks more closely. They noticed patterns, cattle herds drawn with careful detail, people swimming, scenes of fishing and farming. These were not fantasy images. They were records of everyday life. This meant the Sahara must have been a place where water, plants, and animals were abundant. Then came the geological evidence. Scientists dug into dry lake beds and found layers of mud-rich organic matter, proof that these basins had once held fresh water teeming with life. Fossils of crocodiles, hippos, and freshwater fish were discovered far from any modern river. Pollen trapped in ancient sediments told of grasslands, forests, and flowers now absent from the region. Climatologists brought the final pieces into focus. By studying Earth's orbital cycles, they realized the Sahara's greening was linked to the planet's tilt and the movement of the monsoon rains. These shifts had happened many times before, creating a repeating pattern of wet and dry ages across the desert's history. Modern technology, from radiocarbon dating to satellite imaging, confirmed the scope of the transformation. The Sahara was not just slightly wetter in the past. It had been a thriving ecosystem, capable of supporting large human populations and abundant wildlife. This rediscovery changed how we see deserts. They are not always symbols of lifelessness. They are chapters in a larger story of Earth's changing climate. Beneath their surfaces, deserts may hold the memory of rivers, the bones of ancient animals, and the tools of forgotten civilizations. The Green Sahara, once thought a myth, had been restored to history, and in its rediscovery, we were reminded of something deeper, that the planet we live on is never still. It shifts, cycles, and renews itself in ways that stretch far beyond the span of human memory. The story of the Green Sahara is not just about the past. It is a message to the present and to the future. When we look at the vast desert today, it is hard to imagine that it was once alive with lakes, rivers, and forests. But the Sahara's transformation reminds us that climate is not fixed, and landscapes can change far beyond what we think possible. One of the clearest lessons is that Earth's systems are deeply connected. The greening of the Sahara was not caused by a single event, but by the delicate balance of the planet's tilt, orbit, and the flow of monsoon rains. When that balance shifted, the land changed in response. In our own time, human actions are influencing the balance, not through slow celestial movements, but through the rapid release of greenhouse gases and the alteration of ecosystems. The Green Sahara also teaches resilience. The people who lived through its transformation did not vanish entirely. They adapted, moving to the Nile Valley, the Sahel, and the coasts. They carried their skills, their culture, and their memories with them, shaping new societies in new environments. Adaptation is not easy, but it is possible, and it depends on the ability to read the signs of change early and respond with creativity and cooperation. There is another lesson, too. Change can be both destructive and renewing. The Sahara's drying ended a paradise, but it also spurred the development of civilizations along the Nile and beyond. In a similar way, today's climate challenges may force shifts in where and how we live, but they could also lead to new forms of cooperation and innovation. Finally, the Green Sahara is a reminder of patience and perspective. The Earth's cycles are vast, moving on timescales that dwarf human lifetimes. The desert we see today is not permanent. One day, in thousands or tens of thousands of years, the rains may return, and the Sahara may bloom again. For now, we live in the dry chapter of its story, but the memory of its green age lives on, not only in science and archaeology, but in the quiet hope that even the harshest landscapes can one day be renewed. Even in its driest form, the Sahara carries traces of the world it once was. Hidden among the dunes and stone plateaus are pockets of life, small, stubborn echoes of the green Sahara that have survived against the odds. These places are rare and fragile, but they are living reminders that the desert has not always been empty. In the farthest reaches of the desert, there are oases where underground aquifers still feed the land. Here, date palms rise from the sand, their roots drawing on water that may have fallen as rain thousands of years ago. Around these oases, communities tend gardens of figs, olives, and vegetables, creating islands of green in a sea of gold. The sound of running water here feels like a miracle, and the shade under the palms offers a coolness that seems to belong to another world. There are also stretches of seasonal rivers, called wadis, that come alive after rare rains. For a few days or weeks each year, these dry channels turn into rushing streams, filling pools where fish appear as if from nowhere, their eggs preserved in the mud until the rains return. Plants bloom quickly, scattering seeds before the heat takes hold again. Some animals, too, still echo the Sahara's wetter past. Small populations of crocodiles survive in hidden pockets of water in Mauritania and Chad, remnants of a time when they were common across the region. Migratory birds still cross the desert, stopping at the few wetlands that remain to rest and feed before continuing their journey. Even the desert's geology whispers of its history. Fossils of hippos, elephants, and fish emerge from the sands, their bones bleached by centuries of sun. Ancient riverbeds, etched into the landscape, guide the eye toward where water once flowed. For those who know where to look, the Sahara is a map of memory. To the people who live here today, these echoes are both a gift and a challenge. Life in the Sahara requires ingenuity, storing water, building shelter against the wind, and navigating the vast, shifting sands. Yet the presence of green in such a dry world is a reminder that the desert's story is not one of emptiness, but of change. The Sahara's oases and hidden rivers are proof that even in the harshest climates, life finds a way to endure. And in that entrance lies a quiet promise that given time, water, and the right conditions, this land could bloom again. One day, far beyond the span of our lives, the Sahara will change again. The same celestial clock that once brought the rains north will keep turning, shifting the tilt of the earth and altering the path of the monsoons. When that happens, the skies over the desert will darken with clouds once more, and the first drops of rain will fall on the sand. At first, the change will be slow. The dunes will drink deeply, the water sinking into hidden layers before any green appears. But with each passing season, plants will take root, grasses will spread across the plains, their seeds carried by the wind into every hollow and valley. Flowers will bloom after storms, painting the land with colors not seen here in thousands of years. The old riverbeds will fill again, at first with shallow streams, then with rushing waters that carve new paths through the sand. Lakes will return to the basins that have been waiting for them, the shorelines growing each year. In the largest of these lakes, fish will thrive, and the calls of water birds will echo across the surface. Animals will follow, Antelope herds will graze on the open grasslands. Elephants will roam once more, their deep footprints pressing into the damp earth. Crocodiles and hippos will bask in the sunlight along the riverbanks, just as they did in the days of the green Sahara. The air will be filled with the sounds of life, the rustle of grass in the wind, the calls of birds, the splash of fish, and the distant rumble of thunder. People will come, too. Perhaps they will be the descendants of those who left long ago, drawn back by the promise of fertile land and fresh water. They will settle near the rivers and lakes, planting crops, raising animals, and telling stories of how their ancestors once walked here. The rock art of the ancient past will no longer seem like a record of a lost world, but a reflection of the present, and when future generations look upon the land, they may find it hard to imagine that it was ever a desert. To them, the Sahara will be a place of abundance, a green heart in the north of Africa. And yet, they will live knowing that this, too, is part of a cycle, that one day, far in the future, the rains will fade again, and the desert will return. For now, the Sahara sleeps under a blanket of sand, its green dreams stored in the quiet memory of the earth. And if you close your eyes tonight, you might hear the soft whisper of wind over dunes, carrying with it the promise that change is always possible, and that even the driest places can bloom again.